Hello and good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Tech Intel Tuesdays. It is Tuesday, and it's 2 o'clock somewhere, 1400 Central Time. Do this every Tuesday. Listen, last week we talked about source motivation, the primary motivating factors to get anyone to talk to you, regardless of what the topic is. We're going to do lines of questioning and question types and how to ask good questions this week. How to ask the questions that get you the answers that you want. We're going to have to postpone that to next week because I want to talk about two things that are urgent. Number one, we're going to talk about how to get floodplain data. Everybody needs this, especially after we saw what happened this past weekend in Central Texas in the San Antonio area. And then the second thing we'll talk about, we're going to do a little tech intelling today, do a quick practical exercise. And what I want to do is get your response. I'm going to walk you through setting up an Intel shop to provide real-time intelligence support to CBP and ICE operations. We're going to use a little vignette from Los Angeles. And with that, let's go ahead and get into this week's Tech Intel Tuesday. We start off with the question of the week. Is setting up an OSINT feed in your area intelligence handbook. So first of all, it is not in my area intelligence handbook. I mentioned OSINT, but we don't really talk a lot about intelligence gathering. It is mainly, here's the book, by the way, and this is up on Amazon. Listen, the ebook is up on Amazon. The print book, I've still got to, do something with the cover to make it look right. I don't know what it is, but I'll figure it out. And we'll get the print version up on Amazon. It's sold out of my website, and I'll probably just run it through Amazon, just to be honest. So the Area Intelligence Handbook is about how to do an area assessment, an area study for your area. Everybody needs to do an area study. I talk about this quite often. So no, I don't talk about setting up OSINT feeds in the book. So the second part of the question is, if not, anyway, you can talk about it in your next podcast. I found myself starving for information during the Texas floods here north of San Antonio. And obviously our hearts and our prayers go out to the folks that were affected by the flooding, the families, and especially just absolutely tragic stuff. This really, to me, this speaks to the importance of intelligence. Intelligence can generate early warning for us. So anytime you get a weather alert on your phone, that is a form of early warning intelligence. And then intelligence also provides us situational awareness. Intelligence drives the fight. Intelligence drives operations. You cannot have successful operations without intelligence, or you at least run a major risk of mission failure without intelligence. So, yes, I will talk about OSINT in just a second, but for now, everybody, to use a technical term from the Army, lottie-dottie everybody, needs to go to this website, MSC, as in Mike Sierra Charlie, .fema.gov, and download the floodplain data for their area, the floodplain map. You go to that website, it's going to go to some portal. You just type in your home address and hit enter, or a landmark near you, your city, whatever, and download these in PDF. They give you a bunch of options to download them. Just download them. See where the flood risks are in your area, and do not get sucked into these floods. So, at any rate, download that floodplain data, put in your area study, and draw some conclusions about how you might be affected. With that, I've been telling people this for 10 years. And many people have, but stand by. All right, so floodplain data, get it, use it, identify what your risks are. With that, let's go ahead and talk about automating OSINT. Oh, we just talked about that. All right, setting up an OSINT feed. So you do have some options. Remember, automation is a magic word in intelligence. We want to automate as much collection as we can because that means I don't have to be sitting in front of a computer constantly searching for open source intelligence when I can have it automated. And there are some automation tools out there. I'm not a huge fan of Google in general, but Google Alerts does exactly what it's supposed to do, and it can really aid your mission. You go to, I think it's alerts.google.com, or just Google Alerts, and go through that process. If you want to use if you want to use Google Alerts, it works. And you can type in certain keywords. So you might, start off with typing in the name of your county or the name of your city. Or if your city or county is popular and there are multiple Shelby counties across the country, there's multiple whatever cities you live in, then we'll just have to add an additional operator onto there. Just add your state. So Shelby County and Tennessee, Shelby County and Kentucky, Shelby County and Alabama, wherever you live, and set up that feed so you can automate that. So what's going to happen is you're going to be able to tell Google Alerts, all right, I want every single news item or web page that you index that meets this certain search requirement. So we might look up Shelby County and drugs, Shelby County and crime, Shelby County and flood, Shelby County and sheriff, Shelby County and MS-13, Shelby County and whatever you want to know about that happens in your county. You can do the same for your town or city. Now, the bad news is it can be kind of time intensive because you have to go and sit through there and add every single search term that you want. But the good news is once they're set up, it's pretty much fire and forget. They will run on their own. And so you can tell Google Alerts that you want in near real time as possible. Every time you index a web page that meets this certain search query, I want you to email me. And Google Alerts will generally do that. It's not the fastest, it's not the most cutting edge, but it works. Or you can do a roll-up and you can say, every morning at 6 a.m., send me a roll-up of the past 24 hours of every page that meets this search query or these search parameters, and it will email you. So that's Google Earth. You can do something very similar with a tool called If This Then That. It's IFTT. I think it's .com. And it's just like an if-then sequence. If this happens, then shoot me an email or send me a text message or do whatever. So anytime the National Weather Service puts out an alert for this county, send me a text message. You can build, I think they're called recipes. You can build a bunch of recipes. We used to use that for our geofencing back in the day when a lot of the geotags were turned on by default on Facebook and Twitter. And you could actually search that stuff by IP address very easily. If This Then That was one of the tools we used, and we would just build a little geofence and say, if someone tweets in this area, like you could do that for your neighborhood. If anyone sends a tweet from your neighborhood or your subdivision, email it to me. Pretty amazing to see who's tweeting from your neighborhood. So we did that for like protests and riots. We build a geofence in a certain area and then say anyone tweeting from this area or using this hashtag or saying this keyword, send it to us in an email. And that stuff would start to populate, and we'd have like real-time message traffic coming through. We'd be able to see what people were tweeting in real time. There's a lot more advanced tools now, like Maltego. Maltego is absolutely fantastic for doing that. It does get a little pricey, but if you're like me and you do this kind of stuff for a living, it's obviously worth it. Plus, you can just expense it. So If This Then That is another good option for you. And then lastly, there's a website called Feedly. It's very similar. It is an aggregator. So you can go into feedly.com and type in, say, I want to follow this news source. I want to follow this keyword. I want to follow this topic. And now they have this AI thing, which will help you refine your searches. And you can tell it, yeah, give me more of this, or no, I don't want this in my search feed anymore. And pretty handy. I don't know what Feedly costs anymore. Someone told me a while ago that it was pricey now. So if you know of any other aggregators, FeedBurner was one that we used early on just for RSS feeds. You just put in our RSS feed on the website and it will auto-populate new new posts that come on that website. In the chat, if you know of anything else that's similar to Google Alerts or Feedly, or maybe better, then please do let me know. So $8.25 per month for Pro on Feedly. Okay, so less than $100 a year. And frankly, if you want to have situational awareness, especially on your neighborhood or your county, I think that is by far the absolute best option is Feedly, because you can customize it, and it does take in from so many sources. Remember, all this OSINT stuff, you can only get out what's being put into it. So if there are sources that are feeding your OSINT pipeline, great. If there's not sources feeding it, then you'll get less. So Feedly.com is another one that I really like and have used in the past. Before we move on to our Operation Excalibur practical exercise here, let me know if you have any other questions. All right, Life Raft Navigator is amazing, but very expensive. Only get it if you're in the business and can expense like $30K a year starting. All right, good to know, Brian. Thanks for that. By the way, good to see you. All right, if there are no other questions for our question of the week, then that exhausts the question of the week, and we'll go ahead and get into what we want to talk about. So I believe this was yesterday. There was a joint operation between DHS, Customs Border Patrol. I actually think there were 9 entities involved, and this comes from Ken Klippenstein. He runs a Substack. He's a leftist idiot. But he somehow got a copy of this the ConOps slides for this operation. ConOps is concept of operations. And so there's the National Guard, there's Customs and Border Protection, there's ICE, there's DHS, LAPD, some other entities involved, allegedly. And they did a show of force, or show of presence, or presence patrol. And my understanding is that this was to send a message to LA Mayor Karen Bass, probably to the California governor, to anyone in the area, that federal law enforcement is going to go operate wherever they want, and no one's going to be able to stop them, and they're going to go do this. And that's exactly what kind of a presence patrol or show of force, show of presence is, a shop or SHOF. So show of presence or show of force. Basically you just do this to show, like in Iraq or Afghanistan, we would do them just to show whoever that we're going to operate where we want to operate. We're going to go wherever we want to go. And there's nothing really anyone can do to stop it. So that's what that was, allegedly. What we are going to do today is pretend that for this practical exercise, pretend that you're the commander in those shoes, or that you are, maybe part of the S2 shop, the Intel shop there. And what we're going to do is walk through the things that you need to do, the things that you need to set up in order to build an Intel feed, to run local situational awareness, to generate the intelligence you need to protect the force, or just to maintain situational awareness. It's called Force Protection, or Force Pro would be that mission. So I know you can't read this, but let me see if I can make this a little bit bigger on the slide here. If you'll give me 2 seconds. Let's see here. How do I do this? I think maybe this is how, if you'll just give me 2 seconds, I'm going to try to make this bigger on the screen here. I doubt you'll be able to read it, but let's see. All right. So this is Operation Excalibur Executive Summary. This is just the executive summary slide, but the civil analysis says there's a high density of civilians in a complex urban terrain, moderate to high potential for collateral damage if threat activity requires use of lethal force in a kinetic engagement. So one of the things that they talked about in this ConOps, the concept of operations, is the risk, or the potential course of action that local threats like MS-13 or gangs, or even just angry bystanders might engage this presence patrol. So this is exactly, I mean, this is the situation here. The population statement says local population density is high. Estimate is nearly 20,000 people live in the adjacent blocks to MacArthur Park. By the way, that's where this Operation Excalibur took place, MacArthur Park in Los Angeles. Majority of buildings are mixed use, commercial and residential with medium to high density. Local law enforcement statement, DHS will provide 2 hours notice to the of the operation to LAPD, and the Los Angeles Police Department will provide law enforcement response unrelated to immigration enforcement. Over on the mission, this is this Cav squadron, 1st Squadron, 18th Cavalry, blah, 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 provides static interagency site protection. Basically, they're running blocking positions, manning traffic control points, mainly just securing the perimeter of this park so that Customs and Border Protection can go and sweep through the park. So apparently, this was like the main place where people get fake IDs. Hang on one second, guys. Really hate that that happens. I'm sorry. I was using the wrong microphone here because my whatever. All right, it's fixed now. So at any rate, I hope that's better for everyone. All right, so at any rate, National Guard is doing basically perimeter security while CBP came through and swept this park. All right, so that's what we're doing today. Put yourself in the position of the commander, or even some of the CBP or the soldiers there, and think about your intelligence needs. What do you want to know? What do you want your intelligence people to tell you about whatever's going on in the local, what we call the operational environment? What are some things you want to know? Just put them into the chat. So what are your intelligence gaps? Or just straight up, give me your intelligence or collection requirements. Iceman says MacArthur Park is a mini Mogadishu with prostitution, drug dealers, and illegals hawking cheap plastic garbage. Okay, great. That's really good to know. Put yourself in that position. What do you want to know about the park, about what's going on in the vicinity? What are your information needs? These are basically, what are your intelligence gaps? Okay, great. What are the high points? Yeah, what's the points of elevation? As a commander, you want to know that because you want to go put a reconnaissance or surveillance element maybe up on the top of that hill or wherever, the top of the building, wherever that area of elevation is, the high ground. Probably want to know what groups operate in the area specifically. Yeah, absolutely. So we know this is allegedly at least a gang area. There's at least a gang presence here. That's not enough. What gangs are there? And what are they likely to do? Yeah, key terrain in general. That's one of the key tasks there for this Cav squadron is secure key terrain. So those would be the traffic control points, locking down ingress areas, etc. Escape routes. Yeah. So what is our exfil situation? What are our technically they're called mobility corridors, or they may be called some other things, but yeah, what is the area that we have to egress out of once we leave this area? High-speed avenues of approach. Yeah, absolutely. If you're concerned about 1,000 or 10,000 protesters descending on MacArthur Park as you're conducting this sweep, then yeah, we would want to know what is the high-speed avenue of approach, or if some gang members in the area did try to arrive at the park to cause a problem, then yes, what are those high-speed avenues of approach? How are they going to get from where they are to where you are in the shortest amount of time possible? So typically there's going to be, this is an urban environment, so high speed is relative, but the avenues of approach are very important because they tell you how a person can get from outside your AO to inside your AO, your area of operations, quickly. So yeah, these are all pretty good. All right. KR's going back in timeout. All right. Anything else before we move on? Otherwise, you can go to Ken Klippenstein's blog and check it out, read it for yourself. All right. Let's remove that. All right, so the exercise that we're going to work on today is determine the appropriate intelligence collection methods and the platforms or gear that you would want to run in order to maintain situational awareness during this operation. So, think about this. You are the commander in this scenario. What are your information needs? What are your intelligence requirements? We can break that down further into collection requirements or specific information requirements, which is just the pieces of information that we want. So what we're going to do is anybody in the chat, tell me what the 4 primary collection disciplines are that I highly advise everyone develop. There are several other intelligence collection disciplines, but there's primarily 4 that everyone needs to know. If you don't know all 4 of them, that's fine. Just give me one. Somebody in the chat. Think about it. What type of intelligence? All right. So Brian says electronic monitoring. How many cell pings are in the area? See if they have new cell devices. Okay, great. So that would be signals intelligence. Great. Perfect. Yep. Human, OSINT, SIGINT, human intelligence, open source intelligence, IMINT, OSINT, SIGINT. Okay, fantastic. Good job, everybody. So yes, those are the 4, and we're going to go through them in just a second, but I use a specific order for these 4 intelligence collection disciplines, and it really depends on, good, yeah, MASINT is another one, signature. It really depends on what the scenario is, right? Everything is mission dependent. Everything we do, all the gear you take out on a patrol, the gear you pack for a mission, and that goes to include your intelligence collection assets. Now, for us, they're going to be fairly limited just because we don't have billion-dollar budgets and access to all these classified whiz-bang systems and sensors. However, there's a lot of just basic commercial off-the-shelf technology that we can use for this. And in general, the order that I advise you to develop these skills, and again, this is mission dependent. If you're in an area where you don't have the internet, OSINT's going to be pretty difficult to come by. We probably won't prioritize OSINT at the top of this. However, they are in general open source intelligence. So this is predominantly online information, social media. There's a little more than that. But just in terms of ROI on our time, return of time invested, it's really tough to beat open source intelligence because there's so much of it online and we can automate it. I mean, just think about that. You can automate your custom OSINT feeds and then sit back and monitor. And it's not something you necessarily have to stay on top of. You're not going to have to be banging the keyboard, searching for Google and looking for all this stuff. We just automate it. And a lot of the stuff's keyword based anyway. You can do a lot more than that, just at a very basic level. However, setting up these OSINT feeds is relatively easy. It's cheap. In many cases, it's free. And it's something that we can gain access to the most amount of information in the least amount of time. So first is OSINT. Next is HUMINT. And if we have people on the ground or people out in the area, if we have eyes on certain areas, we can utilize human intelligence. HUMINT takes a lot longer to develop than OSINT because we're dealing with humans, and they can't report what they don't know. So they've got to go find out stuff first, and then they can report it back. So it's very time intensive. It's obviously effort intensive. Next is imagery intelligence. So if you have, for us, most of this is going to be drones, but any kind of full motion video. So if there are security cameras in the area that we can have access to, I definitely want those on. I want access to those feeds. In some cases, we might put out our own technical surveillance. So that might be mounting cameras or mounting electro-optical sensors in certain areas that we want eyes on, places that are not easy for us to see. So technical surveillance, that's another option for us. Or it may be for you. And then finally, signals intelligence. And SIGINT is extremely useful when you have it. But if you're in an area where the people you're trying to identify are not using radios or not using cell phones or not using any kind of electronic devices, then SIGINT, I wouldn't say it's worthless, but it is worth a lot less than when you do. Now, obviously, if you're in an area and your adversary is using radios or any form of electronic devices to coordinate, or even if they just have them on their person, obviously you're probably going to want to prioritize SIGINT up top, because if they're carrying a cell phone, that's going to give you a real-time location. And there's a lot of things you can do on the SIGINT side to get access to the content of the cell phones, the content of what's being communicated, obviously massive amounts of metadata. And so if you are in an area where cell phones are in use by an adversary or by threat actors, then put SIGINT at the top. Otherwise, SIGINT goes down low for me, just generally, unless I know for a fact that the people I'm looking for are using any kind of electronic communications devices like radios. Has he talked about the Texas attack yet? No, I have not. Maybe we'll talk about that a little bit later, but I did write a Twitter thread on it, or X thread. Do you consider observations reported by your own team also as human? So this is actually a really good question. Typically, this is going to be a form of reconnaissance or surveillance. So I would not count that as human, although an interview or a debrief would count as human. So one of the things that I did on my first tour, one of the several things I did, was grab a lieutenant or grab a platoon sergeant and conduct patrol debriefs and ask them about, hey, did you come in contact with the Taliban? And where was it? And where were they shooting from? And which way did they break contact? Which way did they run? And, et cetera, et cetera. You talk to the locals. Okay, great. What do they say? So that is a form of debrief or interview, and that is technically human intelligence. Otherwise, we'll probably, if our own team's reporting that, you could count it as human. Otherwise, I would say that's more likely just a form of reconnaissance or depending on the unit or the mission type, form of surveillance. Otherwise, great question. All right, so let's go ahead and start at OSINT. If you were in charge of running the intel shop here, what kinds of OSINT software or websites would you use, and how would you set those up? Anybody in the chat? And we can take as long as we need till we get a good answer. We're setting up an OSINT feed. Where are you doing that, and what types of information are you looking for? How do you facilitate that? For open source intelligence. And actually, let me play 2 videos for you while we wait. I'll play one video for you. So this is a video that was taken during this Operation Excalibur. And I'll give you kind of an on the ground sense of what this looked like. Here's the video. And if the audio is super loud, sorry. Here we go. All right, so Customs and Border Patrol came through and they swept through this MacArthur Park. You're the commander there. All right, yeah, look for local newspapers to include news websites. Yeah, certainly. That would be worth doing. One of the things we could do is scout out ahead and look for protests in the area, look for protest groups before we got there. Seems kind of important. Check if there are live streams from the area, like webcams or CCTV. Yeah, so if this is on a publicly available website, or this is publicly available, typically we're going to classify this as imagery intelligence, but the source would come from an open source. But yeah, I'd accept that as an answer. Probably at least be looking at trending hashtags on various social media sites. That's a absolutely great one. In addition to hashtags, again, in some cases, we can use geofencing to really drill down and look for social media posts from a specific area, but that absolutely would be worth monitoring. International SOS Navigator or any similar enterprise grade tool would be nice if you have that capability. If not, setting up social media monitoring. Yeah, so if you have access to any of these big, expensive, big data aggregators or social media analysis tools or pieces of software, absolutely, that's great. Yeah, Google alerts on keywords. All right, so we're all in the right ballpark. Typically, when we want real-time intelligence information from open source, we're going to get it predominantly from social media right off the bat. So I would definitely prioritize collection on Twitter/X and Facebook, maybe Instagram, TikTok. So, all right, we're all right in the ballpark there. So good job, everyone. All right, we're going to go ahead and move on to human intelligence now. What are the types of people, if we just think about sources, the sources that have placement and access? So the people who would be, the people who would have proximity to the information that we want, or people who would have access to the information that we want. Think about who in this general area might you want as a human source. Yeah, on OSINT for sure. Yeah, create a burner account or just create kind of a sock puppet account that you can follow local protest groups and their leaders or key personnel if they're on social media. Yeah, property owners, business owners would be good. So if you had, people in the area that say could report, hey, these 10 people just came in our store and they're buying, I don't know, whatever, but they look suspicious. I would like to get that information in a text. Sure. Yeah. Neighbors with a window high up facing the location. Absolutely. That's a vantage point. And if we could have people who supported our mission searching the area, at least observing the area, looking for anything that's out of place, looking for anyone who is suspicious, that would be great. I would love to get a text message or a picture or a video from them. All right. That's all good. Let's move on to imagery intelligence now. So we talked about drones already, but obviously ideally you would want to have some kind of ISR assets, multiple assets in the air to search for anything out of place, especially if you're trying to maintain situational awareness. Yeah, on the human side, service providers, so mailmen, garbage men could all be absolutely useful. Yes, UAVs for imagery. Obviously, you do want drones up in the air. Super zoom cameras. Yeah, PTZ cameras. The is it point tilt zoom? Yeah, you obviously want cameras in the area giving you full motion video, and even better if you can use those cameras to scan or to zoom in. Traffic cameras is another great example of full motion video. If you can get access to that, absolutely. So that's all imment. And then let's talk about signals intelligence. Yeah, there we go. Thank you. Pan tilt zoom. All right, PTZ cameras for sure, 100%. And then finally, signals intelligence. So at a minimum, we want a good radio receiver. And remember, a lot of signals intelligence, again, is based on who is doing the transmitting, how are they transmitting, and where are they transmitting? Like what bands they're using. If you have an analog radio receiver, you're not going to be able to listen into digitally encoded transmissions. So you want to make sure that you have the SIGINT gear to match whatever it is you're trying to listen into, wherever they are transmitting. If you have a VHF, UHF receiver, you're not going to get HF transmissions. So that's one reason why I really like a wideband radio receiver or wideband scanner. Someone also mentioned having a police scanner. In certain situations, that is absolutely crucial, but any kind of scanner would be good. Yeah, having an SDR, software-defined radio, even that little $30 or $40 dongle plug-in to your laptop, better than nothing. I would like to use that rather than use nothing for sure. Yeah, any of the Bearcat scanners, especially the P25 Phase 2, the trunk systems. Yeah, Tim brings up a good point about using online scanners. So occasionally in class, people ask me about, or students will ask about, why can't I just use Broadcastify? Or why can't I use one of the scanner websites online? And Tim brings up a great point about the time delay. It's not just the time delay, it's a lot of things. It's availability. And so the way those websites work is if you're listening into a scanner, let's say you're in Los Angeles listening into the Broadcastify scanner. A, it may not even be available. B, in Los Angeles, I don't know this for a fact, but I would almost certainly expect that Los Angeles does not broadcast in the clear. That means they're using probably encrypted channels. So that Broadcastify app or the Scanner 5.0 app on your phone is probably not going to do a whole lot for you in terms of being able to listen in to local emergency services. That said, even if they did transmit in the clear, you're relying on someone else's infrastructure when you listen into Broadcastify or the Scanner 5.0 app. What happens is that someone is in that area and they're running a physical scanner, and they've got an audio cable plugged into their scanner, and they plug it into their laptop, and they're uploading that scanner feed into the Broadcastify servers, and Broadcastify is turning around and piping that back out to listeners. If something happens to that scanner, then your feed goes down. If it runs out of batteries, runs out of internet, power goes off, whatever, your feed gets cut. So I don't want to be in a situation where I'm having to depend on anyone else's infrastructure if I can prevent that. Also, the time delay. A lot of these law enforcement agencies have worked with Broadcastify to implement a 15-minute delay on these feeds. I don't know if you've been in a riot or listened in or tracked riots. We've done a ton. 15 minutes is forever. 15 minutes, I mean, it may as well be 15 years ago during some of these riots that are fast developing. So I definitely don't want to have a 15-minute delay on my real-time feed because I'm now 15 minutes behind where I should be. Those are just a few of the large considerations for using Broadcastify, Scanner 5.0. They will work in a pinch. I would rather have that than have nothing. But realistically, you're not in a scenario where you could have nothing. Even just getting a simple radio receiver police scanner is going to do wonders for you in most cases. Yeah, a friend who's a ham radio operator, exactly. Being able to get that chatter from ham radio operators could be crucial. Yes, you could use something like Kraken to get lines of bearing or eventual triangulation on where people are using radios. Last year, we've done this a couple times now, but last year we did a SIGINT exercise during, there's a great company called Mojave Repeater. They have a great RTO course, a radio telephone operator course. It's a basic commo course. And I highly recommend everyone attend it because A, you learn a lot, and B, communications are kind of important, especially at the neighborhood and kind of area, regional level. And what we were trying to do was so they had a bunch of students, I don't know, probably, 15, 20 students, whatever it was. And they're trying to set up a comms bubble. So they go out, they put up a repeater, and then they drive to different spots and make sure that they can, it's a little more complex than this, but they drive around and they try to relay messages from one person to the other through this repeater. And so there's a lot of signals going through this area. And so we were using a Kraken, which is a radio direction finding kit. And what it does is once there's a phase array antenna, and once those antennas get that signal, they are able to use, I don't know what kind of math it is, but they're basically able to shoot somewhat of a back azimuth to find a general source of where that transmission was from based on signal strength and other things and timing and other stuff. And so the more we drove around looking for this specific frequency, the more lines of bearing we got. And eventually we got pretty darn close to where this repeater was. We eventually put in the frequency of the repeater and we're able to find it. So yeah, something like a Kraken, something that does radio direction finding. You can do it manually. It's a giant pain to do it manually. or, we had a lot better luck with the Kraken, frankly. The Kraken has a lot of limitations. You can only do one frequency at a time, so it's not like a Kraken can scan and do radio direction at the same time. So you have to have your target frequency plugged in. If you're up against radios doing frequency hopping, like Motorola 550, 650, 750s, anything in that family and that range of model, you're not going to be able to do radio direction finding on it. So there's a lot of ways to defeat radio direction finding, but just in general, yeah, absolutely, you can use a Kraken to help you do that. There's a lot of, also you've got to have like a Wi-Fi connection to your phone. You cannot run it without a mobile device. It's got to be Wi-Fi enabled. So in general, I like Krakens. They're cool to use. I'm not sure realistically how they would be used. Well, we'll leave it there for now. All right. So that's good. Yeah, if you can't listen to PD, listen to fire and rescue. If I can tell you, I'm pretty sure all major cities now in Texas, they're running on the same encrypted frequencies. So all of the police, fire rescue, ambulances, EMTs, all that stuff, that's all in the major cities. That's all encrypted channels. So you're not going to be able to listen into it unless you have a cryptophile, or unless maybe you're a volunteer firefighter or reserve deputy or whatever you may be, and you have one of their radios. Are you going to bring up the increasing use of sophisticated jamming devices? Yeah, I know this is a big thing in South Africa, and I've just kind of followed along some of the South African accounts on Twitter that I know of. I think there's been a handful of cases where jammers have been used here. That's more electronic warfare stuff. I don't really cover that on the intelligence collection side, so I probably won't bring it up other than to say that. All right. So those are the primary intelligence collection disciplines that I highly encourage everyone develop. Open source intelligence, again, automate. We've got to be able to automate that stuff so that we're not having to bang the keyboard and go find stuff. We set up these feeds and have it come to us. Next is human intelligence, getting information from, in the Army, we said every soldier is a sensor. So every person in your neighborhood is a sensor as well, or every person on the ground in this area is a sensor as well. So they're seeing things and hearing things, and your job as an intel guy or an intel gal is to coordinate the flow of that information and make sure you're getting it so that you can generate the intelligence that you need. Imagery intelligence is the next one. Mostly this is going to be drones, but any kind of full motion video, photographs as well. It's going to be imagery intelligence. And then finally, signals intelligence, SIGINT. And so that's going to be electronic communications, et cetera, predominantly from electronic devices, radios, internet stuff, technically SIGINT, like reading emails or intercepting any kind of electronic communications. All right. Yeah, never underestimate the sweet old little ladies. By the way, there's a couple other questions that I want to get to here. Are you still selling SHTF intelligence books? I'm not. We sold out of those. I actually did find a box. I was clearing out an old office, and I do have one box left. I don't know what I'm going to do with them. I guess I could sell them, but I'm not sure. I don't know what I'm going to do with them. Is Mike wearing an ascot? No, I'm not wearing an ascot. This is just the collar here of the shirt is like pinkish red. It's from the George Strait collection. All right, guys, any other questions? Put a Q over in the chat. If you do have questions, be happy to answer them. And we'll just go ahead and do Q&A. How does one collect such info? Is this mostly reliant on being in close proximity to the area of concern? Well, you can do it remotely. That's the beauty of technical surveillance is we can have sensors, we can have microphones, we could have video recorders, what are called electro-optical devices. And so that stuff can be done remotely. Signals intelligence has to be done within listening proximity. HUMINT can be done remotely. IMINT can be done remotely. OSINT definitely be done remotely. So your proximity, the more proximate you are, the more likely it is that you're going to get the intelligence that you want. But obviously, you're going to have sources in the area if you're not in the area yourself. Yeah, HUMINT wise, yeah, if you want people to see something and say something, they've got to be within line of sight of whatever you want them to observe and report on. Or they've got to have placement. So that's a proximity problem as well. They've got to have placement in a building, in the park, on the street, wherever they are, in an organization. They got to have access to information. So got to have access to whatever pieces of information you want. Let's see here. Any other questions? Do you ever go into counterintelligence? You know, when I first enlisted, I tried to go join and be a counterintelligence agent. But when I was at MEPS, they said, oh, you got to go back home and you can't ship for 2 weeks. So go back home and come back down here to MEPS. And I was like, I'm not doing this again. What do you have that ships today? So that's my counterintelligence story. I also have an undergrad certificate in counterintelligence. Not that that means anything. I can talk about intelligence. I never did CI in the military or as a contractor. But what questions do you have? I guess that would probably be the best way to start. Counterintelligence, you know, we just talked about intelligence gathering. And counterintelligence is the people on the opposite side trying to block us from gathering intelligence. And so counterintelligence includes a lot of things. OPSEC is a function of counterintelligence, operations security, communication security, et cetera, making sure that we're not leaking out sensitive information as we communicate in communication security. Make sure we're not giving off indicators that indicate our capabilities or intent. Okay, that's what OPSEC or operations security tries to mask. So, you know, at a basic level, everyone needs to practice very basic counterintelligence. And mostly that means not violating some very basic OPSEC principles. So not giving away unrequested information, not going into detail, not going into unnecessary details. Basically just keep your yammer shut about stuff you don't need to be talking about. All right. Iceman says, what are the possible regular civilian jobs one can get that are into intel? How do these skills translate to the civilian world? Yeah. All right. Where do we start? So let's go into some of the basic intelligence jobs that you can do in the military. And my firsthand experience is obviously in the Army. So there's obviously human intelligence. So that's going to be stuff like interrogation or maybe running called military source operations, running actual HUMINT networks or running sources. That's the HUMINT collector's job. I think that's 35 Mike now. 35 Mike is the Army MOS. There's signals intelligence. There's actually a handful of different SIGINT jobs you can get, but you know, in general, that's going to be doing certain types of analysis on signals in an area, looking for signals, listening in. I think cryptographic linguist or something is on there. I don't know. There are 98 Charlies and 98 Golfs. And I don't know. They sat in a Prophet and searched around for signals and listened into it and direction found where they're coming from and other things. I know some of those guys also, they had these things called wolfhounds, and they're backpack mounted antennas. And if you know anything about the SOD A's, or sometimes there was something similar that are attached to conventional units, they would just go around with the patrol and they would listen in for like Taliban chatter on an ICOM, and they would try to listen into what the Taliban were saying. A lot of times they had an interpreter with them. And then the interpreter would say, oh, yeah, these guys, they're talking about this ambush, and it's over in this area or whatever. And, obviously that's something you want to know if you're on patrol. So that's more on the tactical SIGINT side. All the imagery stuff is pretty much going to be drone operators, except for imagery analysts. That was a 96 Delta. I believe those guys were Deltas. And so they're the guys that look at photographs and try to determine what piece of military equipment there is and how many of them there are and where they're located and all the other imagery analyst stuff. There's all source intelligence analyst, which analyzes all source intelligence. So analyzes human intelligence, analyzes, basically the all source analyst is trying to put all of this together into a targeting package or to any battle update brief, whatever the mission is, whatever they're trying to accomplish there. So in terms of doing that on the civilian side, there's not a lot of, I would say, direct civilian equivalents to this stuff. Like, I'd say a lot of the intel stuff, any kind of investigative work, or analytical work, I think, there'd probably be a pretty easy crossover just in terms of analyzing information. It's not like you can be a firefighter in the Army and then get out and go be a firefighter at a department somewhere. A lot of the intel guys that I know, they didn't get out and become civilians, or if they did, they're working at a 3-letter, or they're working at DOD, or working at wherever they're working now. So they kind of stayed in the defense and intelligence system. So I don't know. That's probably not a great question to or a great answer to your question, but those are my thoughts. Yeah, like corporate security, any kind of security job, I think is pretty natural crossover. How do you get targeted human sources if MICE does not apply to civilians? Well, MICE does apply to civilians. MICE RC applies to all civilians. The source motivators we talked about last week. So, I mean, it does apply to civilians. I'm not sure exactly what you mean by that, but if you can rephrase that question, I'd be happy to answer. What do you think about Proton Suite for OPSEC? I guess you're talking about Proton Mail. I think it's more likely. I think it's far more secure than the other commercially available things out there like Google or Yahoo, obviously. I don't know enough about Proton Mail security, but I know a lot of security conscious people use it. And I think it's more secure than most other alternatives. Were you close to the flooding? No, I was not. That was mainly over in, like, from San Antonio up to Austin, north of Austin. So, close is relative. I didn't have any flooding issues where I was. Please sell audiobook. Yeah, actually, that is in the works. I got to record the last few chapters, and I will work on that. How do you keep track of your information requirements, collection requirements, et cetera? Do you just use a spreadsheet? Well, you can. I use some notebooks. I was using Evernote, and then they started doing the cloud stuff, which I wasn't really a fan of. So right now I run a notebook app called Obsidian that I like. And so, that's probably the best way to do that. And it depends on what you're doing and how sensitive it is. Obviously, in many cases, you're not going to want to run anything on an internet connected device. So find a laptop, strip out the Wi-Fi card. If the Bluetooth's on there, great. If not, if it's Bluetooth enabled, find that Bluetooth card wherever it is, rip it out. And now you have a standalone computer. And it does not make it necessarily secure, but it makes it more secure. And again, it kind of depends what you're doing and who's looking for that information. But access control, access control, access control. That's kind of the name of the game. Is the best way to keep a secret is to not allow anyone to know that it exists in the first place. It's very difficult to find things that you don't know exist. And so if you can keep that a secret, you'll be far more secure than anything else. Iceman, if you're looking for a new career, I think counterintelligence is going to continue to be at a massively high demand. I don't know enough about I know counterintelligence is not, I don't know if you're looking to like enlist or join the military or not, but it's not open to entry-level soldiers. It was when I was in, and I think they've closed that off now. But otherwise, I highly recommend intelligence as a job, as a career in the military, at any agency or any government department in general, or intelligence agency. Highly recommend it. Intelligence is great. It's just great. Yeah, reverse engineering can be helpful for understanding enemy equipment, for example, can tell us a lot about the enemy. Yeah, so this is called TechInt, or technical intelligence. So the last place I worked was at NGIC, and I didn't do this, but one of the places at NGIC, one of their main missions is technical intelligence. So looking at enemy aircraft or missile systems or whatever, or obtaining some of those munitions, taking them apart, figuring out how they work, figuring out how they can be jammed, how they can be countered, how they can be targeted through electronic warfare, whatever, what are the limitations. So that's just one example of TechInt. But yeah, absolutely, reverse engineering is great. Chinese do that incredibly well. Any suggestions where to get started in corporate counterintelligence? Well, typically you're going to need some counterintelligence training and experience. And for most people, the best way to get that is through the military. So, if you go in as a Humantor or go in as a whatever and try to reclass to, I think it's 35 Lima, now is the MOS. I mean, I would think that that's probably the best way to get into corporate counterintelligence if you're just starting from scratch. All right, if you can't coerce or compromise someone, because, yeah, you're right, that's illegal, and don't have the funds to bribe someone, how does MICE RC apply to civilians? Well, M in MICE RC is still, it's money, but we could call it material. So a box of ammo, a bag of groceries, whatever. People will do things for things. So figure out what their material needs. I mean, the bottom line is find a need and meet it for motivation, source motivation. I is ideology. You don't have, it's not illegal to leverage someone's ideology. It doesn't even have to be your ideology. They just think it has to be your ideology. Yeah, compromise is like extortion or blackmail. Ego up, ego down. There's a lot of ways that we can use ego as leverage or as motivation for a source for us to learn things. Revenge. I don't know. Embrace ambiguity. And coercion is obviously illegal. So still, roughly half of those MICE RC factors are still legal for you to do. Otherwise, we also talked about Robert Cialdini's rascals: reciprocity, authority, social proof, commitment, consistency, liking, and then I don't know, whatever the first S was. So those are some other principles we can use. But the bottom line on any kind of source motivation is find a need. Find something that they are not getting in their lives, or find something that they need or that they want or desire, and figure out how to use that as motivation. How do you meet that need so that you can get the information you want? All right. Well, guys, we're at an hour, and that's going to do it. We've covered the high points here on how to set up basically a little intel shop to drive an operation like this, or at least to maintain situational awareness. And just as a reminder, you can do this for floods, for wild fires, for earthquakes, any kind of disaster response, any kind of early warning, riots, protests, whatever the case may be. Intelligence drives the fight. Intelligence drives security decisions. Intelligence drives all forms of decision making. And with enough intelligence, some decisions will just be very easy to make. And again, I liken this often as looking at a chessboard. And I want to see my opponent's chess pieces, because playing the game of chess becomes easier when I can do that. It becomes exponentially more difficult when I cannot see the other player's chess pieces, and the risk rises exponentially as well. So making a good decision may be impossible in that scenario, just because there's so many unforeseen risks when you don't have intelligence. That's what intelligence enables us to do. That's why everyone should focus on developing the skills along these 4 collection disciplines: open source intelligence, human intelligence, imagery intelligence, signals intelligence. And with that, that's going to do it for Tech Intel Tuesday. Everyone, thanks so much for watching. I'll be back next Tuesday with another Tech Intel Tuesday, right around 2 p.m. Central Time. And for everyone else, we'll see you on the early warning briefing tomorrow morning, starting at 08 Central Time on the Ford Observer channel. And also, we'll be streaming that on X for a while as well. So with that, everyone, have a great rest of your day. And I hope I don't blow out anyone's eardrums. I guess I need to figure out how to manage the volume on this. But until next time, be well and stay out front.